I think because I knew once I got there. Yeah, I mean, I knew weeks in that he was coming. I mean,
Mm.
at some point I felt like it was obvious. Um, but still, being excited and still, trying to observe enough and taking the moment enough that okay, how am I going to write this, and how am I? I mean, you know, this was one of the first things I've written in a while. Where sometimes I'll put in a pitch and then like that night I'll write everything as is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, pull it back the curtain a little bit. I had already had several feelings going into this date that I wrote like maybe a paragraph one day and I kept it like, oh, okay, well, that sounds good. Let me keep that. So I had like a bunch of like small blurbs that I had to work with by the time I actually sat down.
In the pro wrestling world, there are plenty of content creators. There are plenty of writers, bloggers, vloggers, and people who just like to rant and rave about what they do. But believe it or not, there are very few people who actually put time and effort into this craft as far as learning the fundamentals of journalism. Today's guest is the one and only Phil Lindsey. Phil, a Chicago native, has been writing pro wrestling content for a long time. Currently, he writes for Bleacher Report. And if you're a wrestling fan, you may have heard of a return of a guy by the name of CM Punk. Punk was one of the most beloved superstars in pro wrestling over 7 years ago. And he abruptly stopped after being disgruntled with the WWE and everything else. Well, Phil got a chance to go to Chicago during his return, and Phil being a Chicago native, just like CM Punk, he was able to give us insight on that. And it's one of the reasons why I'm a fan of his, and I'm happy to welcome him on today's show. Ladies and gentlemen, here's my conversation with Phil Lindsey. All right, ladies and gentlemen, on the line today, I have one of the most respected journalists in the wrestling community. There's always a lot of writers, there's always a lot of bloggers, but like myself, he took the time to go learn the craft, and I'm excited to welcome on the one and only Phil Lindsey. What's up, Phil? How you feeling today?
Good, man. That was a better introduction than I feel like I deserved, man. I'm gonna take the compliment, man. I appreciate you.
Nah, man, I definitely appreciate you taking time out your busy day to come on here. I've been a fan of your work for some years and respected everything that you've done, so I couldn't wait to talk to you.
Yeah, yeah. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, before we get into your career, I always like to ask everybody, how you doing? I started this podcast in really the beginning of 2020. It was kind of, the end of 2019, but it was, really the beginning of 2020. And then, everything was going wild. Well, and then boom, COVID hit. So, unfortunately, some people may think we are, but we're really not out of the pandemic. So how have you been doing? How have you been able to balance life and your mental health?
It's been kind of tough. I do think that it's been better lately. Just being able to get back outside a little bit, with the vaccine and other stuff. But yeah, that first few months when it first hit, it was tough being cooped in. Um, I will say I think the positive that came out of it, I was trying to start doing interviewing more at the time.
Mhm.
And I feel like because everybody was doing the Zoom interviews, I got a little bit more interviews and I got more people willing to say yes because they were cooped up as well. So that was a small bright spot in a pretty dark year.
Yeah, well, that's good. And that's one of the things that I grateful is to see, which has been fun to watch, honestly, from afar, is watching everybody improve on their craft. If you look at a lot of the different podcasts, whether it's on a high level or whether it's independent, you see the progress of what they was doing before to what they're doing now. So that's one thing about the pandemic. I think that we've all been able to see everybody kind of grow with each other.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I've been kind of watching a lot of other people get more comfortable interviewing, and that's good to see.
Hmm. Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about your career. Before before we get to college, when did you always know that you wanted to be a writer? Was that something you grew up admiring, or did you do like any creative writing?
No, I did like creative writing for my own,
Hmm.
like just for my own personal stuff, but I didn't like go to school for it. Like, I mean, of course, I took classes and stuff, but it wasn't something I majored in college. I had a really good friend that was like, "Why are you not blogging?" At one point, and I was like, "You want to blog? Like nobody wants to read what I have to say. Like nobody's really interested in what I have to say." So I didn't have any interest into it. But I want to say about 4 years ago, maybe five, I started my own personal blog, and that was just kind of a way to get like my writing out there. It was just maybe like personal thoughts on things, or if I had an opinion on something, I just would drop it there, and it just kind of went from there.
Have you found writing to be therapeutic sometimes?
Yeah, for sure, definitely, definitely.
Yeah, I know a lot of people say, some you have two people, right? Two sets of people. A lot of people who don't like to write at all. They get frustrated because they, feel like they're not good enough. But then you also have people say it's easy and it does, it is service therapy for them. Um, Now you went to school, you majored in game and interactive media design.
Yeah.
So what
Yep.
led you down that path? And were you like always a gamer growing up?
Well, when I first started college, I used to draw a lot. Like I used to draw a ton. And so at first, I wanted to do something with art. And so when I first got there, you get all of the people that are like, you can't make money as an artist, you can't make money doing this. And I was like, all right, well, let me try gaming because there's there's money in gaming, there's money at least in 3D animation and other stuff. And, you know, push come to shove, I can at least say it was a cool experience. And it was a cool experience. I learned a lot about animation. I learned a lot about 3D modeling. But I think after I finished, it was kind of like because it's kind of a tough industry to get into. You gotta
Hmm.
be really, really good. And I feel like once I got out of it, I feel like I kind of really just enjoyed drawing it. Maybe I should have just went and did like illustration or maybe did like creative writing or something else. Um, but that's a whole different topic together. And being careful about your major you pick, and how fast you gotta make that choice coming straight out of high school. I don't think people think about that sometimes.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, especially for people who are, kind of, some of the younger listeners who are kind of wondering like which path they want to go, because sometimes that decision, it can be a fast decision you got to make. And yeah, you could change your major, but sometimes when you change it down the line, it's like, oh man, well, I didn't took all these classes and now
Yeah.
it's kind of a waste.
Yeah, I took this drawing class because you had prerequisites that were just drawing classes, right? And
Hmm.
so I did drawing class, and I'll never forget. I used to do all of my stuff super last minute. I used to procrastinate, and I would just come in there with good work. And so our teacher was like, "What are you doing here? Like, what are you doing in this class? Like, why are you not taking like higher level illustrating classes?" And I'm like, I don't, I'm not really that interested. And she was like, "What is your major?" And I told her my major, and she was like, "Why are you doing that?" And I was like, "I don't know. I just thought, it would be, fun. I thought it was something I would be interested in." And she was like, "How you don't want to make that mass produced stuff?" And I didn't understand it at the time, but
Hmm.
now, it kind of sunk in like, now, I think maybe, I should have did this. So that's kind of another thing, sometimes you just have to listen to people that are there and they've been through it already.
I want to take a quick minute to talk about mental health. As you all know, we are living in unprecedented times, whether it's the racial pandemic or the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, I want to introduce you to Hope Again Counseling Services, where transformation begins. Hope Again provides help for children, adolescents, adults, family, and couples. So give them a call at 410 698 8442 or visit them on the web at yourhopeagain.com to book your appointment. If you are willing to believe, you will begin to achieve, and ultimately, Hope Again Counseling Services can help you receive all that is meant for you. Let's talk about the wrestling stuff. So, one, I always love asking this question: when did you become a fan? What's your first pro wrestling memory?
I became a wrestling fan. I don't remember exactly when in grade school, but I was big on the magazines because my friend used to collect the magazines.
Hmm.
And so, he brought me to school one day, and that's kind of like my first like view into wrestling. And that's when I was like, what is this? This is cool. And he had like the old school Undertaker on the front with the tie and urn. And I was like, this is cool. And that's how I kind of got into it. And I started watching from there.
There's that one with the old block logo.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So we talking maybe like 94 to 96 ish.
Yeah, it had to be around that time.
Okay. So so it was the magazines that drew you in.
Right, right. And of course, we didn't have a ton of money, so I was watching the TV, and then like I would come in, and anybody that I knew that ordered the pay per views, like I come in and talk to them about the pay per view the next day, and but I wasn't going to a bunch of shows or ordering the shows.
Nah, that's funny you say that because that's one of the things that that's missing from, and maybe it's not necessarily a bad thing, but for me, I always talked about it was the phone calls, right? We if we didn't order the pay per view, I had a friend, was it's 2021. I don't think nobody's gonna get in trouble. He had a hot box, and I knew Mondays after the pay per views, I would always call him to figure out during the summertime, like, hey, who won last night?
Right.
Because I knew he would watch it. And I remember we had this whole discussion. Of course, as children, you don't know. And then he was like, well, why, if it's illegal, why would they sell it not knowing his parents probably got it from somebody? But the hot box was the thing back in the day.
Yes.
I think some people may have had that one friend or they knew somebody who ordered all of them. Um, but that was the thing, and I think that's pretty cool, you bringing that up, the fact that, going to people and talking about it to figure out. Now, one of the things I always appreciate about your writing, which we'll get into though, is that you're a fan of pro wrestling, which you obviously have people who are sports entertainment fans, but do you remember when you started becoming a fan of stuff outside of, the major companies, the stuff that was so easy to get access to, like WWE?
Oh yeah, that was years down the line. I want to say
Okay.
that was like that was in like the 2000s at some point.
Hmm.
Um, I always say like a big part of what made the pipe bomb interesting is it got people to go, okay, what is that? What is he talking about? Because I had never heard of New Japan until he said it in a promo.
Really?
And right,
But
and it was just
okay.
like other things like that where I'm like, well, I had heard of Ring of Honor, but
Hmm.
him mentioning it, and I of course knew some of his stuff from Ring of Honor, but it made me think like, okay, what else is there? Because Punk's saying it, I want to go look at it.
It's so funny. I've heard everybody talk about different parts of that pipe bomb, right? Like, from the fact of whether or not it was work or how it made them feel or how it even related to their job. Like, but I never heard nobody bring up the fact that it made them look for those other wrestling companies. You're the first person I heard say that. And so, and for those who do not know, in 2011, CM Punk, kind of was given an open mic and he was said everything how he felt. But so that's what led you to kind of look into the other companies.
Yeah, I feel like I looked into it before that, but I feel like
Mhm.
him mentioning New Japan definitely got me more interested in New Japan than I was because, like I said, I didn't know about it.
Okay. Now, was you writing for Diva Dirt yet?
I started there that 2017 or 2018, so that was way long down the line.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's when I first started, catching some of your stuff. Because I used to always pay attention to what they said. I'm a huge fan of women's wrestling, so um, and the craft of it. So that's when I kind of would pay attention. So how was your experience there? And especially you're writing essentially just about women's wrestling, and you know, at that time we're starting to get better coverage of it, but it wasn't like, I mean, you can make the argument that it is or it's not today, but at that time it wasn't, you wasn't seeing the women main event WrestleMania.
Yeah, yeah. I it was a I it was a good experience in the sense that it gave me kind of my first break. I remember, like shout out to TK Trinidad and like Evan. I remember like when I first got like any kind of exposure outside of like people just retweeting or sharing an article, and they talked about one of my articles on their show, and I was like, "Yo, that's kind of dope." And I saw it show up somewhere else, and I was like, "That's kind of cool." And so I feel like that was like my first like real break as a writer there.
Mhm.
And I feel like everything else I've gotten from that from writing has kind of started there. There's some things there that weren't great, but that's just that just comes with the territory when you're a contracted writer.
Yeah. Do you have a moment, like one of your favorite articles that you wrote there?
Um, I did something like around Black History Month, and it was on like Ethel Johnson. It was on the Lady Wrestler documentary before it came to Amazon,
Mhm.
and I think that's back when Chris was still trying to get it on streaming platforms, and he had just showed it at the film festival. And I just
Okay.
thought it was such an interesting story because it was kind of like Hidden Figures, where we don't hear a lot about Ethel and a lot of those women. And so it was something I really wanted to cover for Diva Dirt because I felt like not a lot of people knew who they were.
Mhm.
Um, and that was the article that got picked up by TK, and it got picked up by Ring the Bell, and I made relationships off that. But it wasn't just the fact that I made relationships and got exposure. It was just something I really felt like needed to be out there. And I'm trying to support Black women, trying to support Black wrestlers as much as possible. And so I felt like that kind of gave me this battery in my back to like, write about, you know, Black wrestlers who are not talked about as much as I can, because a lot of other people in our industry are not going to do that.
Mhm. Nah, that's true. That is definitely true. And shout out to you. I definitely want to give you your flowers publicly for doing that because it's a task. It's a tall task, and it comes with great responsibility because you still want to be accurate, but especially when you're covering something that nobody else is covering. You want to do those families justice. And shout out to Chris as well because for him doing that, he's opened up a lot of awareness about those Black women, and especially when there was a botch during the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
You know, um, he was like, being able to call that out and people could see that there was a botch based on with the work that y'all had put in. You
right.
know, are you planning a huge celebration and perhaps you need some balloons to make your event look nice? Well, I have the perfect place for you, and that's Symphony of Balloons. Symphony of Balloons will do all events, including baby showers, weddings, birthday parties, or that special anniversary. Contact them today at 410-802-1531 or email them at symphonyofballoons@gmail.com and tell them Brian H. Waters sent you. So the Bleacher Report, how long, how did the opportunity come about? You've been obviously able to do a lot of great things. How did that opportunity come your way?
Yeah, it's crazy. I was just telling somebody I've been there for a year, which it doesn't seem like that.
Mhm.
I How did that come about? I It kind of came about at the same time as I got the complex thing, which just still sounds crazy in my head. Like,
Mhm.
no, you know what? I take that back. They were like a month apart.
Okay.
Um, so I had left Diva Dirt at that point, and I was doing stuff at another women's wrestling site, Bell to Bells, and I was just kind of volunteering there. It wasn't like it was a paid thing. It was just like I was just volunteering to help there, and I would get some other paid things off of that, and I was doing a lot of other smaller things. And so I got a message from their editor on their wrestling team out of the blue one day, and it was like, "Hey, would you be interested in writing here?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, sure." And of course, I had to do like all of the interview stuff and whatever, and send in samples. But that's kind of how it went from there. And I found out somebody recommended me based off of work that I did, I think for either Daily DDT or somewhere else. And so, yeah, it's just kind of one of those things where you hear people talk about how, don't do anything for free, or, don't take like uh those like click for pay things or like rev share things. But I feel like at one point I was doing so much, and I was like doing so much either just because I wanted to get content out there,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like it got me noticed enough to get other places. And so sometimes you just have to do that. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not ideal, if you can avoid it, sure, but sometimes that writing for exposure does help.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you said that because a lot of college students, they so internships are different nowadays compared to when we was coming up, right? Because it's almost it's almost rare that the internship is unpaid.
Yeah.
A lot of these, almost all the big companies are paying now. When I interned at the Baltimore Sun in media relations, and this is around the time, it was certainly during, was it 2012? So it's certainly during like CM Punk's title reign, and I got a chance to cover one of our local RCW just to kind of put things in perspective. At that time, Jazz had came to the show. She was taking on Kimberly, so and it was cool. I got a chance to cover it for work, but I was an unpaid intern. It was during the Ravens Super Bowl season. But
Yeah.
nowadays, people are getting paid, which I'm happy about. But I'm glad you kind of put that out there for the listeners to understand. Now, how does it you go about the process? Because one of the things that I really enjoyed was your piece a couple weeks ago about CM Punk's return to Chicago. Well, return to wrestling, right?
Yes.
And how everything had lined up perfectly. Um, you know, one of the things that I was able to enjoy was your personal perspective of it, right? Because everybody's going to write about the article. Okay, CM Punk, he came back, he said this, he said that, but you was able to kind of like detail it, but also make a comparison to Michael Jordan coming back. How is it like? Try to make sure I answer this right the way I hear it in my head. How are you able to like make sure like you can kind of pitch these ideas where you're writing from that first person perspective and sharing your experience in that case?
Um. Well, I because I went and I knew that I was going to go with media. Like you said, it's only so many times, any ways you can cover this. Like you got to give the facts of it, and I feel like when I talked to my editor about writing about it, I was like, I'm from here, I'm from the city. Like there's certain cultural and significant things for me that looking at it from the outside in that I wanted to cover it in that way, and my editors just trust me enough to do that. Now of
Mm-hmm.
course you got to get your facts right in there too, because you can't just go all right, I want to get my personal account of it, but I also you also want to make sure that you have everything correct as well. But yeah, it's just a matter, I think, if your work speaks for itself. I've
Mm-hmm.
done other things from my personal viewpoint, and I just think if your work is well enough, your editor will trust you to do that.
Yeah. Now, how do you balance because you're a fan, but you're also working, right? And that was a night. I mean, they showed the clip of the man crying, right?
Hmm.
That was like I'm sitting at home, and I was on Spaces with you earlier that day, and I remember you broke down the significance for me to really if there was anybody to sell me that was Punk was really coming, it was you
Hmm.
because you heard the rumors, but it's like, yeah, what if? But when you broke down that they booked the United Center and nobody books the United Center, that's something in Baltimore. I don't
Right.
know. I hear Chicago, right? It's like, oh, okay, they're in Chicago. For my knowledge, it's like, wait, the Allstate Arena, that's not where the Bulls play. You know what I mean? And that's being just a typical, out of towner. Then when unless I'm like doing actual research and said, oh, okay, there's two different arenas. So when you broke all of that down, that's when I knew Punk was coming. I'm gonna be honest with you. That's when I knew. So, like, how was you able to stay, like, kind of balance the two of being in work mode, but also just taking it in as a fan because it was history.
Yeah, I think because I knew once I got there. Yeah, I mean, I knew weeks in that he was coming. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
at some point I felt like it was obvious. Um, but still, being excited and still, trying to observe enough and taking the moment enough that okay, how am I going to write this, and how am I? I mean, you know, this was one of the first things I've written in a while where sometimes I'll put in a pitch and then like that night I'll write everything as is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, pulling back the curtain a little bit, I had already had several feelings going into this date that I wrote like maybe a paragraph one day and I kept it like, oh, okay, well, that sounds good. Let me keep that. So I had like a bunch of like small blurbs that I had to work with by the time I actually sat down. And so that made it a little bit easier for me. And I could go into, okay, what was the feeling there? How, like, jot down, all the questions you want to ask yourself coming out of it. But man, in my bias, of course, when I pitched it, I was like, man, how much can I talk about the Bulls in this? How much can I talk about this? Because I'm a fan. I'm a fan of that era. I'm a fan of a lot of that, and I know that Punk is a big Blackhawks fan. So
Mm-hmm.
I know the importance of being the United Center for him. And so I was like, how much can I get all of that in there, and how much can I also keep this about wrestling?
Wow. Was that so also what was really cool is so from a video editing standpoint, right? We do a lot of pre-production. We'll grab clips beforehand so that we can, you know, put them in so that when by the time we actually record this show, we already have the B-roll. So it's really cool to hear you talking about pre-production from a writing standpoint, because most people like maybe write a bullet point like okay this is what I'm going to talk about, but to hear like you saying you write the blurbs and already have stuff together, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, yeah. I don't come to everything the same way. Every now and then, I'll have something that I'm really, really excited to write about. And so sometimes I'll have stuff that I already have written down. I mean, I know you're supposed to get the pitch first sometimes, but sometimes like in the midst of putting together my pitch, like I already have stuff that I kind of want to say that I'll start, kind of writing down. Um, and sometimes I just, come just write my first draft and then come back and, change bits of it. But this was the first one because it was just such a different experience in being there that,
Mhm.
and all of the thoughts of him possibly coming back to wrestling, like I just didn't want to lose any thoughts I had before I got to it.
Yeah, well, like I said, I gotta give you your props, man, because you took me for a ride. Um, I'm somebody who loves to read, and especially love reading people's columns, and especially on their perspective. But to on that high of pro wrestling making a shift, right? There's always this WWE versus AEW. I'll be loud. And I'm a WWE mark, whatever, right? But at the same time, I'll even, I'm actually preparing to do a blog, a break it down with Brian H. Keeping 100 on the former stars, the quote unquote, the truth about the AEW stars being in former the former WWE stars being in AEW. There's a lot that I love about it because as much as I love the WWE, I love even more when they have another when there's an alternative program, right?
Yeah,
That's something that's easy to watch. That's almost I'll say same level as television, right? And I think it's better for the business because we're old enough to remember the Monday Night Wars and changing the channel, meeting people. Which team do you ride with, WWF or WCW? And
yeah.
so I think that's really cool. But you took me for a ride with this article because I was like, wow, like, and before I knew it was over, I'm like, wait, oh, okay, but that's how good it was. So that's why I was happy that you shared that perspective.
Yeah, yeah. I was glad to get a chance to be there in person for his return, and then get a chance to write about it the next day.
Mhm.
And that was a humbling experience, and I especially like it came back and I saw like some of the reactions to it was good. I was like, I'm just grateful that I got a chance to do that.
Yeah. Now, do you how often have you been able to cover wrestling like in person like that? As far as like AEW or WWE, do you get a chance to go like cover it all the time as they come into town?
I don't.
Okay.
I got a chance to do a little bit more of that before the pandemic,
Hmm.
um, but not a lot lately. We're just now getting back out to live shows.
Okay. Now, when you look back at everything, the title of the show is called "Breaking Through the Glass Ceiling," right? Um, what was the one point when you realized like, oh, I'm really good at this? When do you feel you broke through the glass ceiling?
Um, I think at some point you gotta look around and see like if you believe in like manifesting things and everything is kind of coming together at the same time. And I feel like I was getting a lot of opportunities at the same time. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this is like a thing that's happening. It's like, at some point you got to get past that like imposter syndrome of like, do I deserve this? I don't know if I don't know if I can actually do this. And it was kind of like, no, you're getting all of this at the same time because you're good at this. And sometimes you gotta look at certain things that you get and say no to it because it's like, nah, I'm kind of better than this. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not arrogance. It's just like, nah, I know that I know that there'll be another opportunity later.
Yeah, wow. Do you have a moment like? Would you have like that one time period where you remember this all happening for you?
Um, I would say like it's like right when I got Bleacher Report offer, I got an offer from another site at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and then a month later I got offered the chance to do the thing for Complex. So it was like
Wow.
all within like 3 months. I mean like 2 months.
Wow, that's amazing, man. That's definitely amazing. What do you see? Like, what is your ultimate goal? As you continue in your career and doing everything, if you don't mind
Uh,
sharing.
I definitely would like to try and do more interviews. I definitely want to try and keep trying to do more columns and just change the way that people write about wrestling a little bit because I feel like there's a lot of people either they want to be a scoop guy or they want to be the guy that kind of editorializes everything, and I feel like I want to be able to kind of like I did with the punk piece, add my personal opinions to it, but also cover it in an objective way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, certainly, definitely. I'm a fan. I'm definitely looking forward to more pieces, man. Before we get out of here, let the people know where they can find you.
You can find my work at Bleacher Report, of course. Still trying to get them to fix my profile. I don't know. Sometimes you click it and it goes to error. Uh, I don't know. Don't want to get to ranting on that. You can find me on Twitter at PhilDL616. I'm always surprised when people like this weekend. I saw people when they're like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I know you from Twitter." And it's and every now and then somebody like, "That's where I know you from." Like, oh, like they don't know the writing, they know the Twitter. It's weird.
When's the first time that happened to you?
What the Twitter exchange like that?
Yeah,
Um,
and was it within the wrestling community?
I was definitely within wrestling. I was at a show. It was like maybe like a small indie show, and somebody was saying, like somebody tweeted me afterwards, and they were like, "Hey, I think I saw you at this show, but I couldn't tell if it was you." But there are not a lot of black guys with
Mm.
locks at indie shows or some of these other shows. So it's like I'm pretty sure it was you, and I wanted to come up and say hi, and I was like, "No, no, no, come say hi if you do." And like sometimes people will walk up and say hi like that, and I'm like, it's kind of weird. It's like I don't know.
Hey, man, you made it. you know, it's
Uh,
just like I mean, me and Dwayne been doing the wrestling around. This is our 10th anniversary year, and we started going to shows together after the first year, so like 2012. And with him being 6'7", he hard to miss. But people would come up to us and be like, "Oh, y'all from the wrestling realm," and it's definitely a humbling experience because you putting out content,
yeah,
you're praying that you can relate to somebody with it and they enjoying it, and then people come up to you and and they start talking to you about it, and I think it's really the coolest thing. That happened to me this past weekend at Jimmy Seafood, and this is my first time going out in a while. Shout out to my friends from the Flex Zone. Shout out to my bloodline, Britt Waters. We was out and, just being out there, people coming up to her, "Hey, you're Britt," so it's really cool. And, wrestling fans are wrestling fans, you know?
yeah. I definitely will say that seeing people in person is a different experience than Twitter because I feel like Twitter is just so contentious sometimes. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you see people out in public, it's like it's all love, it's all happiness. Like everybody's happy to be at shows, everybody's happy to be enjoying wrestling. It's none of this tribalism of I'm on this side of the fence, you're on this side of the fence. It's cool, and I that's definitely what I've enjoyed about getting back out to shows.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Phil, I definitely appreciate you coming on, man. Thank you for taking the time out your busy schedule.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
No problem. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me on this episode of Breaking Through Glass Ceilings. Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Phil. Make sure y'all subscribe to the podcast. Share it with your friends. Make sure you let them know they can go ahead and get it from Spotify, Apple, Google, Anchor, and all other podcasting platforms. Remember, folks, do not let anyone set up a ceiling that you can't break through. So long, everyone.